Welcome back. Let's talk Syria, where Kurdish fighters are bracing for an attack after Turkey says it has completed preparations for a military invasion, and President Trump has said U.S. troops were leaving. But despite the president's announcement, NBC News has learned that U.S. forces have not yet received official orders to withdraw, and they remain in wait-and-see mode. Richard Engel is NBC's chief foreign correspondent and has reported extensively on the Kurds in northern Syria. Richard, what should we make right out of the gate out of the fact that the president makes this announcement, yet it hasn't made its way to the U.S. troops?
Well, I think this is speaks to the fact of how chaotic U.S. foreign policy is right now, where foreign policy is being made by tweet, and then soldiers who are there still in war zones are waiting for this to either filter down through the chain of command or not filter down through the chain of command. So there are about 1,000 U.S. troops in Syria right now. They're still there. They're not packing up. They haven't received orders to pack up. They are doing normally what they do, which is working with their allies, the Kurds, the allies that President Trump suggested in this infamous phone call, yet another problematic phone call between President Trump and a world leader. This one taking place over the weekend when President Trump called the president of Turkey and suggested that not only are U.S. troops going to be leaving Syria because the U.S. is done there fighting ISIS, but that the U.S. would not oppose some sort of Turkish military incursion into Syria, which caused our allies, who are standing next to these roughly 1,000 U.S. troops co-located on bases, to go into an absolute panic and worry that the Turks were going to come in and massacre them, and that the U.S. troops, who've been their partners all along, standing right next to them, would not be allowed under the commander-in-chief's orders to intervene and save them.
Richard.
Now, frankly, the soldiers don't know what they're supposed to do because they're still standing there, and the U.S. and President Trump is continuing to tweet and add nuance and confusion to what his position is.
Richard, you have called this a moment of American betrayal. Our strategy in Syria has gotten a lot of support, both from the military and Congress. This is not a wide-scale occupation like we have seen in Syria or Afghanistan. We've seen many say this is a good model. So do you buy any of the president's now explanations for why this move makes sense?
Well, it was a good model, and the international coalition that was built to fight against ISIS, to fight against the ISIS state, the caliphate, was enormously successful. It's hard to find a more successful partnered military operation in modern times. But the aftermath of that operation has been catastrophic. It has been disorganized. There are tens of thousands of ISIS supporters, fighters, family members who are still at large or in loosely guarded camps. Now it's unclear if the United States, the Trump administration, is going to stick with our allies. So yes, the military operation was a success, but as is often the case, the follow-up has not been there, and that is where we are right now. And is it a betrayal? Of course it is a betrayal. I personally saw American military commanders reassuring their Kurdish partners that they were with them, that they were brothers in arms, they were in the vehicles together, they fought together, and now they achieved success together. And then to hear President Trump say, the U.S. troops are leaving, go ahead, Turkey, go into that area, we won't stand you up. And then to couch it, it leaves those American allies very, very concerned about who they were fighting with and whether the leadership has their backs.
Richard, thank you. Let's broaden out this conversation. Kevin Barron, Executive Director of Defense One, and Ned Price, former member of President Obama's national security team and an MSNBC national security analyst. Kevin, Democrats don't like this, allies don't like this, and Republicans have come out strong against this. Who wins here?
Well, Turkey wins, Russia wins, Iran wins. Every other country, every other organization, every group that has an interest in Syria and Middle East stability that's not the United States wins because they're there and they're going to have influence. Look, I agree with what Richard was saying about betrayal. I also have heard from senior military commanders, former very senior military commanders who think they were stunned by this decision. But you asked the question, why do this? I think in Trump's mind, Syria is low-hanging fruit. He ran on the promise of ending forever wars, which has now become a big campaign, talking point, even for many of the Democrats. They're all aligned on this. And your choices of ending forever wars are either ending Afghanistan, ending ISIS, or ending a whole lot of small skirmishes around the Middle East. And Trump thinks he could end this. He thought that a year ago. The problem is, as Richard said, they're twofold. One, allowing Turkey to come in to Syria and somehow placate the region, and also handing over control of the prisons. There are 2,000 foreign fighters in those prisons from the European countries. Trump keeps harping about that the Europeans won't take them back. But there are 10,000 fighters from Iraq and Syria that aren't going anywhere, and someone has to keep tabs of that region. And I'll point to one last thing. I interviewed Ambassador Jim Jeffrey this summer in Brussels, and Jim Jeffrey also, I asked him about this forever wars concept, and he shot it down. He said it's 1930s kind of thinking. When evil rears its ugly head, you have to go after it. And so even got people like Jim Jeffrey, the senior ambassador for the region in Syria, who's been trying hard to bring all the parties together back onto the peace plan to Geneva, to build a new constitution, to find a post-conflict way forward in Syria. Even he had already brushed this aside months ago, and he was flat-footed by this. So it's no surprise to me that you're seeing this widespread condemnation from lawmakers, from national security leaders. But Trump thinks his base, who doesn't like these endless wars, who loves that talking point, think, wow, this is a good thing. It's Trump being strong yet again.
All right. Well, it sounds like Turkey's going to Syria, Ned. They're also coming to Washington. What do you make of the president's invitation this morning, extending an invite to the White House to Erdogan? And let's remind our audience, the last time Erdogan was in Washington is when his security detail beat up protesters while Erdogan sat in the car.
Yeah, Stephanie, I'm not one to offer advice to President Trump, and I assume he's certainly not one to take my advice. But
well,
you never know.
If
I did, however, I might say that he should hang on to his wallet because every time he has been in contact with Erdogan of Turkey, President Trump has been fleeced and outfoxed. And I think we saw this most vividly in recent months. Remember, it was just December when President Trump announced precipitously and impulsively, even without informing his full military leadership, that we would be, remember, immediately withdrawing from Syria. Of course, that never happened because it was walked back by people like Mike Pompeo and John Bolton, the latter of whom is no longer there to do that in this case. And then just before the decision to remove these 50 to 100 troops along the Turkish-Syria border, we understand that President Trump also spoke with President Erdogan. And according to those who were witness to that call and who may have seen the transcript, President Trump once again was outwitted and outfoxed. So, all this time we've been looking for any semblance of consistency or principle in this president's foreign policy. And as Richard and others have been saying, I think it has been staring us in the face the whole time. It's a foreign policy of betrayal of our allies, betrayal of our values, betrayal of the American people. And I say that, betrayal of the American people, because we have to remember, this is what Ukraine Gate, or whatever we're calling it, is all about. It is the president placing his own personal interests, be they political, be they financial, over the national interest. And let me just say, Stephanie, I am still grappling, trying to understand how the president's betrayal of the Kurds in Syria can elicit strong bipartisan condemnation, as it should, but how the president's betrayal of the American people can only engender outrage from one party in this town. That's something I'm still trying to wrap my head around.
All right, you can keep wrapping your head around that, and we're going to say to you, come on now, why are you surprised? Kevin, Ned just brought up the president's wallet, so let's talk about it. Conflicts of interest. I want to play for you an interview then candidate President Trump did with former advisor Steve Bannon on Breitbart Radio about Turkey back in 2015. Watch this.
Okay.
If you're elected president in prosecuting the war, what do you do with Turkey? Is Turkey a reliable partner? I know they're a NATO ally. Are they a reliable partner?
Well, I have a little conflict of interest because I have a major building in Istanbul, and it's a tremendously successful job. It's called Trump Towers, 2 towers instead of 1. Not the usual 1, it's 2.
He still does. In fact, Ivanka Trump deleted her 2012 tweet when she thanked Erdogan for coming to the celebration, the opening of Trump Towers, Istanbul. How is this still not a conflict of interest for the president?
Well, it is. But I mean, frankly, come on. The Trump hotels all over the world, that's the least of my worries about conflicts of interest. I'm much more worried about...
You can't do, but come on. If it's a conflict, we have to call it out. Otherwise, we're normalizing it.
It's a conflict, it is. And on Defense One, we have been listing, after the president came to office, all of those conflicts of interest in different cities. But there's there's a major national security worry right here. I go back to last year when the Turks were trying to push into Manbij in northern Syria. Erdogan threatened to kill American troops. He said if the U.S. doesn't get out of the way, they're going to get an Ottoman slap. And the Americans stood their ground. General Votel was the CENTCOM commander at the time. We were up in the region, and there was a show of force that held the Turks back. But he threatened to kill the United States troops. So as Ned said, and even as Bannon said, this is a NATO ally, and the Americans much would rather prefer a NATO ally stay close to the United States than go closer to Russia. So we understand the difficulty with dealing with Erdogan, but inviting this man to the White House, forget about. We know what he did last time he came with the protesters, but this man directly threatened U.S. troops and has paid no price for that. I'm much more worried about things like that and how you handle a NATO ally than I am, frankly, about one hotel among all of Trump's major obvious conflicts of interest around the world.
All right, then, gentlemen, thank you. Answered the question, who does this serve? The answer is Turkey. The answer is Russia.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.